Our next speaker is Jonathan Richman.
Thank you once again for the opportunity to speak today. Going to skip the introduction, save a couple of seconds here. But want to ask the sort of what appears maybe to be a little bit of a paradoxical question at sort of first blush, and that's can a lack of regulations actually improve the quality of healthcare information available online? Sort of as Bill Drummey already did before, sort of put up the FDA mission statement. I've sort of put it up for a little bit different reason. It's to sort of, again, look at the purpose of this meeting overall, which to me, for all the questions and sub-questions that the FDA has asked, it really comes down to one question. And is it allowing additional leeway for pharma to participate in social media? Does it have a positive or negative net impact on public health? If we can't answer that question appropriately, then these sort of hearings are all for naught. So that's probably what I would like to talk about today and show you through a few real-life examples how that sort of plays out online. Fortunately, a number of speakers before me have done a fantastic job in supplying all this background information, so I get to skip through it. Some applause to that. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, I won't show the same ones over and over again. I'm going to stop for a second on this one, only to emphasize the point of that user-generated content certainly does affect treatment decisions. So 6 out of 10 people have reported that user-generated content does impact their treatment decisions. And that's obviously significant as we get into looking how they sort of react online. In the end, what I think is obviously patient health is at stake. The poorer the information, the poorer the outcomes are likely to be. And so through a number of examples, I'm going to show you how that sort of plays out. These are actual posts from a few different sites. This one is from iGuard. In this case, the person is talking about Arimidex, which I have sort of a special fondness for. This is a product I used to work on and have some personal history with when I was at AstraZeneca. It's a treatment for breast cancer, an adjuvant treatment after your surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. The normal course of treatment for this is 5 years. And you can see in this example that the patient has now taken it for 2 years and probably throughout the entire time has really toughed through some difficult side effects of joint pain, which happens to actually be a common side effect of the medication in this class. You can see at the very end, she's down to the point of, can anyone help me? Even though, in the next sentence, she's saying she has a visit with her oncologist the very next week. She's looking for sort of advice. So the question is nobody answers this question online. Has that improved or made public health a little slightly worse? And it's not just for extremely complex questions either. There's really simple questions as well. So this is a question that somebody's asking about, simply about the dosing of Valtrex and for cold sores due to herpes virus. And somebody, of course, steps up and is happy to answer the question, not necessarily in the best way possible. They say, sure, double a dose and see what happens, and then adds on, well, I wouldn't hold my breath, though. Not necessarily the best medical advice altogether. A lot of people have sort of made the comment that as sort of legitimate sources of information are, like pharma companies, are made a little bit more difficult for them to communicate online. That void is filled by criminals and charlatans looking to sort of fleece upon us the latest snake oil or shark cartilage solution to all of our problems. But in a lot of cases, that void is actually filled by really well-meaning people who unfortunately give bad medical advice, even with the best intentions. So for a question like this, I would submit, is there a role for pharma to play? So for a very simple question like this, again, going to the very crux of this, is leaving this question alone because of regulations and because of how pharma is allowed to participate better for the public good, public health, or is allowing some leeway to actually answer this question an improvement? So a simple answer such as this, where a one-line answer, not a big elaboration of the statistics and finer points of one study or why my product is better than yours, a simple factual answer could actually probably have a lot of benefits for this one patient. Of course, letter of the law today, pharma companies aren't allowed to do this, and so on forms the answer would look a little bit more like this, which of course is far less usable for your average person. And it's already been talked about a number of times today that we really need to, when participating in these communities, follow the sort of community norms. And a 5-page response, including all the fair balance information, unfortunately isn't those norms. So is there a way where we can get back to a simple answer like this, where we still feel that we're communicating the appropriate safety information as well, at the same time having an overall net benefit on the public health? So let's increase the stakes a little bit again and go back to our breast cancer example. What I can tell you is from this patient taking her drug for 2 years instead of 5, she reduces her mortality by 20%. So statistics from longer treatments with hormonal therapy versus shorter. So if nobody answers this question and she goes on to not take her drug from this point forward, who is that really benefited? So regardless of what answer a pharma company gives, is allowing this question to go unanswered and the person stopping their drug the benefit that we'd like to have. So looking for a potential compromise, surely we don't want a free-for-all of pharma companies answering anything online and saying anything that they possibly want as well. So I'm going to submit basically 5 rules that I think should apply to this sort of participation. First and foremost, your answers should be about questions that are about your product only. So answering a question specifically about your product or correcting somebody who's sort of stating some sort of misinformation about your product as well. What we shouldn't do here is answer questions about disease states. So for example, somebody says, well, can anybody recommend a treatment where XYZ? Only to have 45 pharma companies spring out of the ether and explain why their drug is so much better than everybody else's. That is not good for public health. The second one is short, consistent safety disclaimers. In the one example I gave, there wasn't one in there, but I certainly believe that information needs to be in there. But again, balance against what the norms are of the site as well. There's a sort of practical reason for it as well. If we have too long of the information in there, again, people won't participate. Eventually, we'll be banned from these sites, most likely, and that doesn't serve anybody any good either. The next one is sort of the script of what sorts of things you can actually say. So again, we don't want necessarily the finer debates on statistical analysis of certain studies, but there actually already exists a script, of course. So people on this panel and everybody in this room have spent a lot of time making these things with all this tiny print on here, but in the end, this is sort of the script of what's approved for the drug and what's not approved. And simply sticking to that eliminates the discussions of off-label topics or getting into some of the scientific discussions or subjective ideas of what's right and what's not with patients. But going back to the Valtrex answer, a simple statement of fact from the prescribing information could go a long way and eliminate a lot of the bias that consumer groups, I think, are reasonably concerned about. The fourth one is some way to validate that the answer is legitimate. So if this is allowed and pharma companies are in these types of forums and they're putting their answers in there, certainly the next level of criminals will simply take whatever way we're using to say that we are a pharma company and say, well, of course, I'm a pharma company too, and I think my drug's terrible. In fact, you should go with this treatment instead. And who knows what they'll insert. So through a number of either digital signatures or a few other technology solutions, I think it's possible to validate that an answer actually comes from the person who it says it's from. And then lastly, some sort of cataloging and periodically sharing with the FDA. It's probably not practical to put every single answer on a 2253 form before you submit it, but I think it's more than reasonable to ask companies as well to sort of on a regular basis catalog the answers to certain questions that they have and share them with the FDA. So just a quick example of what this might look like. This did not actually happen, so you don't need to call AstraZeneca. This is totally fake. But what you see here is the answer instead. Very quickly, somebody saying, yes, this is a common side effect. It occurs in X% of patients, right from our prescribing information. But very importantly, recommend contacting your physician. This is not meant to be a replacement for anybody's physician. Pharma companies should not be playing that role. You also see some very clear some safety information at the end, full disclosure on who the person is, and then a link to some other safety information as well, and then some way to sort of validate that response, whatever it may be. So looking for some middle ground where we can say participation in this area can actually improve public health going forward. So I want real quick thank a couple of people who helped me out with this. Dr. Val Jones, Susanna Fox, and Melissa Davies, who all gave me a lot of the information, some of the examples that you saw in the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richman, for your presentation.